Alright, back to Project Nickel and Dime. We got the 302 short block back from the machine shop from Whole Shot High Performance Race Engines here in Lakewood, California. We'll be searching out some aluminum cylinder heads so I can run a 2.02 intake valve and a 1.60 exhaust valve. That would be probably about a 190cc intake port volume. I'll get into the specs of that later as soon as I round up some heads. But the short block itself was bored 40 over, so it puts it at about a 307. And that was a 68 block with a 68 crank. So that would be, I believe it'd be 3.5 on the crank and 4 on the bore. So that'll be an interesting little build. Much more to go with that as it comes along. Transmission, I had the linkage serviced, switched out from a column shift to a floor shift for the replacement transmission C4 that I got. I have some video and some pictures of the differences between a 6-cylinder and a V8. Torque converter, flex plate, bell housings, all different. Gearing, different. Overall, front to back dimension, the same. 28 spline on the output shaft and the transmission, those are the same. I will also have another video coming up, obviously, of a drive shaft, and we'll learn that a 6-cylinder and a V8 drive shaft for 67 and 68 Mustang are the same, except for the transmission yoke. So I'll get into that later. But these video clips following up here are for the motor mount installation. Motor mounts are different from a V8 to a 6-cylinder. Pretty straightforward, just nuts and bolts. Another video would be exchanging the wiring harness. My old alternator was not up to the job to handle an electric fan, which I'll be doing an installation for that as well. Power steering pump, pulley install and removal. Very important to get the proper tools for that. There's a lot of torque involved with removing a power steering pump pulley. And brackets, those are all totally different. As the story goes, nickels and dimes. I also have a video clip for the speedometer cable removal and installation. And I figured now's the time to do it. I had a leak in the cable housing at the bottom of the car. So the housing is basically something you probably just want to do and replace all of it at once. So that's what I decided to do. Transmission's out, engine's out, I can get to everything. The fuel line installation from underneath the driver's seat all the way up to where it comes out right in front of the left front wheel well inside the engine compartment. All that had to be rerouted. You cannot have a hard fuel line right next to an exhaust manifold or a header. So you have to bend tubing and get that fabricated and mounted with simple brackets. That's not an issue, but it's something that needs to be addressed. And I also had to fix my Holley 600 CFM electric choke carburetor that I got. I believe the carburetor had never been used. There was no fuel in it, and it had a broken booster. So I have a video on the things I had to do to fix the booster and the secondaries. So, okay, here are the new motor mounts for V8s, small block V8. The actual rubber mount themselves are universal. It's these guys that are right and left. It can be kind of pricey for those. And there's a difference between a 67 and a 68. 68s have a drop down hole here. 67s are up a little bit depending on whether you have a big block or not. So this should be the orientation, and we'll get those in next. Alright, pretty straightforward. That's your mount for the right side, and that's your shock tower there for the left side. And this guy should go on here like a so. You get the idea. Okay, got the new motor mounts in as far as the brackets go to the frame, and I do have motor mounts that go to the engine block, and we'll get there when we get the engine. Alright, cool. Right, here are the new actual motor mounts. They connect to the block. And I'll keep this bolt here. That's when I do the install for the engine, actual engine. I'll keep these handy. Just pop the nut off, and then I'll be able to slide them in once I get the engine set inside the engine compartment, so that way I don't lose them. Okay, I've made a change from the last video for the motor mounts. I went ahead and decided to replace the cheap minimum grade bolts with grade 8 bolts, because this part's going to be the actual bracket that sits inside the frame rail and the shock support. So I just went ahead and decided to change those bolts. Another issue that I've got to address for Project Nickel and Dime. Another issue that I've got to address for Project Nickel and Dime is the alternator. This is a stock 6-cylinder, probably about 60 amp, 80 amp tops alternator, and the replacement I have is 105. Now, I got this one not because it's chrome and shiny, but because it'll produce the amp rating that I need for the electric fan that's going to be running with the thermostat, and obviously it's going to pull more juice off the battery and the charging system. So I wanted to go with a Ford style case. This is also a 3-wire setup rather than the single wire, internally resisted alternator. So it's sort of stock appearance, but it has a higher amperage rating. It's a regular V-belt drive, just like the original. So it's not a serpentine setup, because then I'd have to change all the pulleys in the engine compartment, and I don't want to do that. And the other thing that I'll need to do is replace this harness, because this harness is just dead. So just your typical aftermarket Mustang part, Ford part, and I'll get that hooked up and get this thing replaced and cleaned, obviously, and I'll also have to use new bracketry for the geometry to fit for a small block Ford, in my case a 302. So hopefully I won't have to take this dual pulley off, but if I do, I have the tool for that. It's the same tool that's used for the power steering pump pulley. But one other thing I got to do for a charging system for Project Nickel and Dime. Alright, so while we're waiting for the other pulley to show up for the power steering pump, I'm going to use my old alternator as a guide to install the new alternator harness to the new alternator, because this guy is not up to snuff to handle the job. So we want to update that one. And this came from quality, Concruise quality reproduction parts. So, typical Ford reproduction part. Pull this out, check it out, and get started. Alright, so I flipped up the old alternator to check out use it as reference for the wiring for the new harness. Now it's pretty obvious that what used to be the black wires here on the right, the white wire here on the left, smaller posts here on the new alternator. I have no clue what this guy was for. I don't believe I had it hooked up to anything. I'll have to check the wiring diagram for that, but I don't remember disassembling it. And this obviously goes to another part of the car, if not a ground. And this will go to your charging system harness, which is the same as the orientation for this new plug. So should be pretty straightforward. Hooks up like this. Lots of room. Let's get it done. Actually, it's a pretty nice fit, but let's see how well I get those nuts down in there. So 7/16 nut driver. Nice bite. I believe this one is a 3/8. Yep. Of course, we always gotta drop something. It goes there. Both sides nice and tight. Nice clean connection from the bottom. Then the reproduction has this new pressed on cap, which is actually pretty cool. And you just press that on there. It's actually a pretty good fit. That works out better than the old one, you know. Looking good, looking real good. Alright, here's my cleaned up pump. Not exactly pretty, but I'll hit some primer on there, some high temp primer, and then I'll use some of this Ford Blue power steering pump color, coordinated factory color. Then I'll have a different bracket here for a small block. It should clean up pretty good. Alright, here's a 302 small block power steering brackets, factory bracket. I use photos for reference, always come in handy. And here's the bracket. It's going to be orientated like this. And then for up here, I made one of these so the stud can fit through. It just looks cleaner, so I don't have these low budge looking threads. I don't have the factory bolt. So small details make it look good. Custom aluminum spacer, spacer tube, covers up threaded rod, nut and lock washer. Back side of the pulley, electrolysis method. Takes that paint right off. Look at that. Peels right away. Look how clean that is. Takes off all the rust. Hit with some primer, high temp black paint. All new. Alright, here's the cleaned up bracket. Looks a lot better. Alright, looks like the free pulley I got is not going to work because I am a ½ inch short on the shaft. The end of the shaft needs to meet the face of the pulley, and I don't have that room here and here. So it's like I gotta find the right pulley. It's not gonna work. Well, I think I did pretty good today cleaning up the pump, removing the pulley, installing the new replacement bracket, customizing my studs, cover, and installing the bracket. It's already been cleaned up, original, but now I've got to get the right pulley. So 5 steps forward and 3 back, but it looks a lot better and it's a lot lighter than the 6-cylinder bracket that I had on here. Hopefully next weekend. Alright, so I finally got the other pulley. Obviously a difference in the diameter, and if you look at the profile, huge difference. So should line up just right on the pump. So I'll do the electrolysis method on this one and clean both sides up again. Clean it all up like this, and we should be good to go. Cool. Alright, here's the cleaned up pulley. Second pulley. Cleaned up pretty good with the electrolysis, so I'll go ahead and hit it with some primer and some high temp black paint and do it all over again, man. But I think this is the winner. Getting closer. Alright, it took some work, but I finally got the pulley on. You want to get the face of the shaft just equal to the very face of the outside pulley here. I still have the room here that I needed, and over here as well. So that worked out pretty good. It was a mother to get on though. I had to use vice grips to hold the pulley to get this stud on before I could turn this. So that was a bit of work. Here's a tech tip for putting on pulleys. Might be a good idea to throw one of these in the freezer for a few hours to get it to shrink up. Not necessarily in a big sense, but the material starts to contract and it might be easier to put on the actual pump shaft. So that might work rather than trying to heat it up. So this thing was a real bear to put on. Alright, next up is going to be a speedo removal. Speedo cable, that is. I've got an abrasion on the outer housing of the speedometer cable right underneath the driver's seat, and it's been neglected and now it leaks, so now it's the perfect time to replace it. So what I'm going to have to do is take these Phillips head screws off on the instrument cluster, pull it out, get to the nut that's behind the center here for the speedometer cable, and then I'm going to have to fish it out from behind the cluster and pull it through the firewall. But now's a good time because the engine's out and I have access to everything. Here's the engine compartment clip. This is the emergency brake cable that goes up through your firewall right here. This is your speedometer cable. This is obviously the inner frame rail, but to get a better idea of where it's located. So obviously a good time to do this when the engine is out. That's the factory clip that clips to the frame rail. Obviously have some problems with that. And where is that leak? Right on the back side of this. Right there is where I had the leak. So, and this is the gear that I'll swap out and put in with the new cable housing. Good times. And the speedo cable comes up right behind the new brake booster, and of course it's
impossible to get your hands on there, but it's supposed to pull out this way. If it's hard, that means it's always a party. This is the new replacement Speedo, which is from Scott Drake Mustang Parts. This is the instrument cluster side, and what I'll do is pull this cable all the way out and lubricate it. Probably put a little bit of grease on this end. This is the grommet that goes to the firewall, and this is the end that goes to the transmission. And what I'll do is I'll clean up that gear, put some grease on here, install that, and then that's the clamp, so it goes to the transmission. This is the lubricant I'm going to use for cables and chains, so I got this at Napa, and it should work out. It's a good idea to use one of these magnetic cups to keep your screws together when I'm taking this apart or anything like this, especially interior parts. You don't want to lose those screws. But here I am with the instrument cluster. It's loose. The only thing really holding it in is the Speedo cable, which is behind here. But for this, I have to drop, to get access to it, I gotta drop the fan heater selector. That's next. The other hassle you have to deal with is the dash pad that is shaped around the edge of the cluster, so it's gonna snag. But if you yank on this plastic, it's so brittle you could break it. So, always a fun fit. Okay, to get better access, you have to drop the whole heat air selector assembly. I mean, you get my hand in there a lot easier. And then you get your hand back there. I got my hand on the nut, and you turn it to the left, and it's already coming off. And it should break free here in a second. You can hear it, the nut's off. And come on, you. Back that out. Cool. Now this doesn't look very exciting, but I got it broken loose, and I can hear it moving inside the firewall. That's a plus. Now I have to keep a mental note of the routing for the Speedo cable. Goes right underneath the AC duct here for the driver's side, and it should go straight out back, sort of to the left for the firewall. Back in there. And we'll pop off this clip. A 1/2 inch socket. Getting to that grommet, the firewall behind the brake booster, sucks. So I had to, by feel, put my finger down on the other end of this long skinny screwdriver, and I'm wedging it now. It's so old and brittle that hopefully I can work it. That's the only thing holding this thing up. So the moral to the story is the best time to replace your speedometer cable and housing is when the brake booster is out. Alright, I couldn't get the old cable out, or cable housing, because right when you get to the, just before you get to the firewall, there's a factory loop that actually holds the Speedo cable housing in line with the back of the instrument cluster. The trouble is getting this nut through the factory loop, and I don't know if the angle's slightly off and I can just press it through. It's pretty tight. I might be able to wiggle it, but hopefully I won't have to drop the bracket from up underneath the dash. It's way up there. Of course, it's a pain. And the other issue is breaking off the old grommet, which I'll have to get a pair of pliers underneath the dash and squeeze this part, and it'll break because it's so brittle. But right now I can't remove it from the firewall side because the brake booster is literally right here. So I'm out of time right now, so I'll have to revisit this. That's it for now. Alright, with the incredibly bad lighting and losing light here, I did get the Speedo cable grommet broken from the inside and through the loop that's essentially right under the cowl, under the instrument cluster. And there it is, the original Speedo housing. What a pain. And you can see that the factory one is shorter. Shorter by about 6 inches. So make up the difference, and probably behind the master cylinder booster and also underneath added clearance for possible exhaust. Next we pop out this retaining clip, and the gear should slide off. I'll clean this guy up for sure before I put it on here, and I will also remove and lubricate this entire cable with this oil that I got a couple weeks ago. Okay, next up I'll remove the tip and soak it in oil. And let's keep a note that this piece goes at the back of the actual speedometer gauge. Pretty obvious that my factory clip that mounts the frame rail is broken, so I'm gonna have to use something else, probably one of these. So there you go, and on goes the clip, which goes on goes the clip. We'll twist this, check, make sure the speedo is working on the other end, which it's not. So I'll have to check that again. Now we'll test it again. It's working here. Cool. Alright, what I'm going to do is bag this in so I don't get any dirt and debris on it until I get the transmission in. Keep that lubricated and oiled. You can use transmission fluid if you don't. You have cable oil. That should work just fine. So I got everything cleaned up. It should be ready to go. Until then, I'll just keep it bagged, and right now I'm going to fish speedometer back through the dash. And back at the frame rail, I'm going to have to hook it up to this clamp, fish it up back behind the steering column, up past the brake lines. There you go. And then behind the booster, there's a hole. It's probably about that big. And then the grommet will fit through that, and then I'll have to fish this end through the loop inside the dash. Alright, so I found the problem to this speedometer cable install. It's basically this cheap Chinese cable on the very end here. It's had a little bit of a bump on it, and then it started to fray. One wire started to fray out, and you can't get that thing to spin inside the speedometer. It's supposed to slip right in and go all the way up to this collar here, and it doesn't do it. So, you know, reproduction Ford stuff is, you know, always a case. There's always something wrong. So that's the problem here. I can't use this cable on my, or I should say, I can't use my previous cable on my new housing because it's 6 inches longer. So either try to fix this, or I'm going to have to just wait and take it to a speedometer shop once I get this car rolling. This is just crap. Unfortunately, most reproduction Mustang stuff is. So, good times. Alright, so I tested out the speedometer. I did get the cable on to the behind the instrument cluster, and I took the bag off here and I spun the gear, and I can get a bounce out of the speedo there. So once I straighten it out and spin it, the speedo does bounce up. So I don't know, it's a temporary thing. Hopefully this will work, but I have a feeling down the road it's gonna snap or become frayed on the end again on the inside. But until then, I gotta just get it routed and set, and I'll go ahead and wrap up this gear and the O-ring again for the transmission, wrap it around a Ziploc bag and tape it so it don't get any dirt and crud on it. So I'm not happy, but hopefully it'll work for a little bit, and it's time to move on. Alright, I got the instrument cluster back in. Had to fight the dash pad, of course, but you gotta get aggressive with it because it just gets soft and forms down around the plastic. And of course you don't want to push too hard on the plastic because it's brittle. And then I'll start the screws, get this sort of set, and then I'll hook up the defrost air conditioner vent hose to the outlet down there and put those screws back in. So hopefully it'll work. I'm still not impressed with the reproduction. Always a hassle. Alright, got it set, got everything in. No screws left from the magnetic dish. And boy, doesn't that look great. So I'll go ahead and go back inside the frame rail in the engine compartment and put the clamp on and get that routed. So on the Mustang job board now I can erase the speedo, but I'm sure it'll break sometime. But for right now, done. Okay, back to the fuel line. I still have to put this little clamp on the frame rail. This is the piece I cut off the very end in the engine compartment. I'm going to use it as a test fit for this extra clamp I had laying around. So it's nice and snug and tight. So I'll drill it out, the frame rail that is, and use a self-tapping sheet metal screw. Put that in and button it up. So it needs to be done towards the inside the wheel well there, just in front of the tire before it goes into the engine compartment. I need a clamp in there, so that's what I'm going to do. Should work good. So I think I'm going to opt to put that bracket in right about here. Nice angle here, keep it tight and snug. Keep it clean so it doesn't pop out. Okay, got the clip secured in there. That line is not going to pop out. So that's exactly what I want. Then I can go back over here to the previous connection there with the rubber hose and hook that up. So now my fuel line's done. Killer. Okay, next up I'm going to replace that fuel hose that's underneath the driver's seat right there where it's connecting the original line with the new line. And here's a piece that I cut off in the engine compartment. This is a 5/16 fuel line, fuel emissions line. You got to make sure you have the right material for that. Maybe the focus is better here somehow. So I'm going to use this piece to test fit it and then hook up the hose clamps and we'll be good to go. Alright, the carburetor for Project Nickel and Dime. What this is a Holley, basic Holley 600 CFM carburetor, electric choke. Anything that's just basically your standard carburetor you can get at any store off the shelf or mail order online. I picked this up with some other parts at a swap meet, garage sale, and I decided to pull it out the other day and check it out, make sure everything is okay. And then I discovered that it has a broken booster. This job over here, completely broken. So I will have to get that replaced, take that to the carburetor shop and get that pressed out and a new one pressed in, because these little jobs or boosters are pressed in. And what that would require would be taking off the bowl off the back and somehow pressing this piece out, what's left of the booster stem here, and then having a new one pressed in. So I think I'm just going to have somebody else do that at a carburetor shop because they'll have another booster, I'm sure. So Project Nickel and Dime, man. It's always the nickels and dimes. Okay, sad news on the carburetor shop. A guy wanted like anywhere from 70 to $100 just to replace the booster that was broken. They basically wanted to take this all apart and make sure everything was there, and it's kind of like, come on, man. So
Did a quick search on junkyardfind.com, couldn't find what I needed, so I had to end up going to eBay, and I got replacement boosters, 2 of them for 15 bucks. So I'll get those in 4 days. In the meantime, once I get those, I'll break down this carburetor, knock out the broken stem of the booster here, figure out how to get that out, either drill it or press it or push it, and I'm going to learn how to redo boosters on the carburetor. Alrighty, well, I did get my boosters from CCS Performance Carburetors way back in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and this is the exact part that I need to replace my broken booster. So what I got to do is take off the metering block, take off the transfer tube, and then I might be able to get a punch this way and knock out the remaining stem of this booster, and then I'll have to figure out how to get the replacement in there. So that's going to be a challenge. And if worst comes to worst, I can take it to a carburetor shop and see if they can press it on. So first step is to take off the metering block. I want to get this off carefully because I don't want to bend this tube. And straight out. Alright, well, I found the nut driver that I need. This guy right here. It comes with the Edelbrock Holley Demon Quick Fuel Carburetor Rebuild Kit number 12750. Comes with these kits, so that's good. I haven't opened this up yet, but I remembered I had it, so maybe I won't have to get into quite all that just yet, but at least I have the nut driver. And I'll be sure to not lose that. And that fits right on here. Where are you? Where are you? Oh, that's interesting. It's a different size. Good times. Alright, well, this nut driver, this 5/32 nut driver, is too big. So, pretty much useless. So I think I'll try to use a screwdriver when all else fails, right? And look at that, it just comes right out. Now would be a good time to get that little magnetic parts dish out so I don't lose these little screws. Yeah, the screwdriver goes right in there. Not a lot of torque on those either. Alright, so I got this piece off. And I made a quick note in Sharpie that side's up, obviously, but I don't be wasting time trying to figure out orientation. And then I will carefully work this gasket loose. This should give me access to the back side of the broken booster. Come on, you. And well, this gasket's pretty chewed up. Let's see if I can dig up another one. Alright, here's the back side of my boosters. probably use some acetone, clean up this metering block surface here. It's pretty minor. Alright, so I marked the booster needs to come out, which looks like it's been brazed on the end. And I got a piece of scrap metal here as a drift. It just happens to be the right size diameter. And that doesn't look good. And out it comes. There's my broken piece. Alright, what I'm going to do next is put some painter's tape over this metering block surface here to keep any crud from getting inside any of these orifices. I don't want anything getting stuck down in there. Keep it clean. So, super simple tape. Now I got to figure out a way to get this guy pressed in here. And actually it goes right in. It's a little bit of a tighter fit than that at the very end. And then I have to make sure that the angle's right, not that it's turned sideways. But it's a street carburetor, so it's not super high performance. It should work out pretty good. Alright, so looking at what tools I have, this is a windshield wiper removal tool. I thought would work. Great idea. This part doesn't work too well. And then I found a small C-clamp with a washer that I hooked on the inside here. Just taped it on. That's so the ring will clear here on the inside. When I clamp it on this way, it just clears the inside here. I do a little bit of grinding on it. So when I clamp this down, it should compress it just perfectly. So let's give it a try. And what I'll do now is put some Loctite 290 green around here. I'll let that set up, and we should be good to go. Cool. Alright, so I got the Permatex green around there. I got the booster installed loose. Back off my C-clamp here. It's not even a press fit, it just goes, slides on. Looks like I'm going to have to braze it. Alright, so I got it chamfered out. It's still a little loose. Not too set on that. No pun intended. So I'm going to go ahead and try the green locker. Loctite here. Let that sucker set up. I'm going to wedge it back up. because I like to keep things tight. Here's a close-up of that chamfer. Hopefully it's in focus. Alright, for a quick recap of what I tried to do to fix this booster, basically I took the metering block off, took the gasket off, took this piece off, knocked out the rest of the existing booster stem that was lodged in here in the main valve body. Then I attempted to, well, I thought I had to press these boosters in as everybody states online. Apparently that's not the case, they just slipped right in. So I tried to stake it, it didn't work. Then I went ahead and I tried to braze it, and basically just created a lot of heat in the valve body, and really didn't get the heat absorption I needed to get the solder to drop right in there in the hole in the slot around the neck or stem of this booster. But in effect what happens is I put a lot of heat into this pot metal, and then I staked it again, and I actually got it to bite inside the valve body. And then I went through and I put a chamfer with a countersink screw, or not screw, but a drill bit. And then I went ahead and put some Loctite 290 around to seal it up. And I did all this while it was all wedged in, so it's nice and stiff. And that's where I'm at. And then I'm going to do new gasket. Put the metering block back on. Or I should say put this guy back on, and then put the metering block back on. Tighten it up with the 4 screws, or the 4 bolts, and we should be good to go. So that's what I've been doing. Alright. There goes there. This goes there. These go here. Get these started, thumb tight. Follow this up with the nut driver. Yeah, I got a booster. Alright, cool. Alright, Project Nickel and Dime. We'll be back with more great stuff, getting this 67 Mustang back on the road, and see if I can get it out and to do some autocross, maybe some drag racing. So check us out next time. Alright, this is Davis. Let's get on the primer.